Okay, so I did not want to originally make this channel be this. This channel was originally going to be like my channel to do video essays or, like about challenge runs or movies that I liked or music or video games or whatever. It wasn't necessarily going to be like a off the cuff kind of thing, but a video got posted today that I think missed the mark so intentionally that it kind of can't be ignored. And that video is by Rhett, and it's called, at least at the moment, the problem that every amp modeler has that can't be solved. Let me start off by saying I don't think that Rhett is like a bad person. I don't think that he's uninformed. I understand that this is YouTube and he has to make videos to make money, and that this is probably one of those. In fact, there are a lot of things in the video that make it seem as though he understands that what he's saying is potentially not the whole story. But he put the video out there and I disagree with it heavily. So there's three main points for the video that I at least took away from it. I'm going to go back to front essentially with one that I think I mostly agree with, but that just needs caveats. And then the other two that I basically hugely disagree with. Starting with the smallest one, he made the brief argument that limitations breed creativity. Basically the idea that if you have one amplifier, one guitar, one, pedal, whatever, you are going to find the most ways to use that. And I think for the most part that that's pretty accurate. It's very common for, bands who have a guitar player or a bass player who has a specific rig, whether, they have one amp or they have one speaker cab or they have one pedal board to do everything. They will try to do whatever they can with that gear, right? So like a guitar player may not have, the ability to take a dual rectifier out for a Creed song that they're covering, but maybe their Marshall or their Black Star does a decent enough job and they make it sound as close as they possibly can. And I think that that's fair. I think that's just overlooking the fact that with digital amplifiers, you have access to more things, and most people would want more things. Most people would want other tube amplifier if they could. Whether it's taking it out on the road or taking it out at home. People buy tube amplifiers all the time to have another one. I feel like it's kind of missing the point, but ultimately I think that the idea itself, that limitations breed creativity, is good, is fair and correct. Getting onto the other stuff, I'm going to be working backwards. He says that you pay an extra price for the digital convenience of having a pedal platform like the one that he's using, which is a Quad Cortex or like a Helix or something like that. And I don't understand this idea. I think that it's kind of not paying attention to the market. Even for someone who has owned amps and currently owns a tube amp that I don't use when I go out with my band, because A, it's heavy, and B, it's a pain in the ass. It's so lost on me that he thinks that digital is so much more expensive when it's not. Obviously, based on the at least current trends for example, the new Boss digital pedal that I'm blanking on the name of, but it's the white one that helps you recreate a single Boss pedal at a time, and they're potentially going to, sell other digital versions of their Boss pedals for X amount, and you don't actually own the pedal. For most of the other stuff, that's just not the case. It is not more expensive to go digital. It's actually cheaper in most cases, or at least like comparable. I think maybe he's taking the list price, the MSRP of a Quad Cortex, which is around $2,000, and putting it up against, like the cheapest possible analog rig you can get. But let's not forget that like the cheapest possible analog rig is not what most people want when they get an analog rig. Maybe there's somebody out there who wants, a really, really cheap Randall amp from the 80s and a very cheap, crate like cab that, that's their dream rig. Totally possible. But most people want like a JCM 800, or they want like a blackface Fender, or like a silverface Fender, or like a Mark IIc or something like that. Like it's not exactly like these are super cheap things to even find on the used market, much less on the new market where there are reissues, but they're expensive. A JCM 800 20-watt head right now is like $1,500 in the US. Keep that, like a 20-watt head, right? Not the 100-watt that everybody loves and has seen people play time and time again, but the 20-watt head that people use because 20 watts is more than enough. And, even the Fender like replicas that are not, custom shop, hand wired, or anything like that, you're looking at like $1,500 for most things. If you put that up against a fully kitted out like Line 6 Helix, for example, those, at least the older versions, are $1,600 for not just that one Fender or not just that one, Marshall. It's basically any amp that you can think of, and you can mix and match a bunch of pedals in there, and you can mix and match a bunch of IRs and different cabs, different setups. You can go stereo. You can have that Fender and that Marshall going at the exact same time with the same input. It makes sense if you look at it from a time perspective, perhaps, but even then, you still have to learn how to use amplifiers. It's not like you can just get a Marshall and plug in and say, I'm going to put these knobs in every direction and it's fine. That's not the case. That's just not how it works. You do have to spend time to tune that amp to you. You have to spend time to tune that amp to how you play. For example, for most Marshalls, I leave everything at noon except for the gain, which I drop to maybe 3. Keep the master volume pretty low while I crank the channel volume, and that works for me because that's what I like. And some people do the exact opposite, where they crank the master and drop the channel volume, or they crank everything. It just depends. And saying that that's an extra time investment for digital is ridiculous. And not to mention, if you want to try out a Boss pedal, for example, let's not call it Boss specifically, but let's say you want to try a flanger pedal or chorus pedal. I've been wanting to add a chorus pedal to my rig for a very long time. I can't justify spending money on a chorus pedal though. I have a flanger pedal. I'm just going to use a flanger as a chorus pedal. It's pretty damn close. And honestly, I dig the sound. And if I just had the option to do that, instead of having to buy a chorus pedal and instead just have a chorus pedal, I would probably do that. Unless you were looking at the price of the nicest new digital options, which is for the most part a quad cortex or a Kemper, putting it up against a used collection of analog gear, you can't really justify the extra price, in my opinion. I'm gonna move on. I think you can understand where I'm coming from. But the main part that I think is most important and that I definitely need to speak out about is this idea that analog will not be obsolete while digital pieces will. And no, absolutely not. There's this idea that all tube amps last forever, and that's just not the case. There are a lot of working tube amps from the 50s, from the 60s, but a lot of them have also died. A lot of them have had beer spilled on them, or they've just gone kaput, and you can't figure out what's wrong. It might be the transformer, it might be some random capacitor, it might be that the two plugs are not soldered anymore, and it's just not worth it to fix it. Those things happen. Those things happen all the time. Same with pedals. Pedals especially go bad all the fucking time. Analog pedals that are hand wired go bad all the fucking time. And then rather than have someone fix it, because it is usually cheaper just to buy a new one, they'll just toss the old one and buy it. And that fix may have been 10 seconds, but it doesn't matter, right? And this idea that digital is going to be, obsolete when analog isn't, is, I think, foregoing the past in a way that's not helpful. Because I'm a big Marshall guy. I love the sound of a pushed JCM 800. I currently use a Tonex with my band, and my sound is essentially one of the stock JCM 900 sounds that's supposed to sound like a pushed JCM 800. And if you're going to tell me that there was no such thing as obsolescence in Marshall amps, I think you're just wrong. You start with him fixing originally Fender amps. And then eventually he builds his own because he's in England and can't get the same parts. So those Fender amps would be considered obsolete. And as the years go on, right, he starts with the 59 Super Lead and then the JTM 50 or 45 or whatever. And then he goes to the JCM series, and that was in the 80s. And it's okay, so what happened to the old style, right? The idea of 4 input, having to jumper it to get extra gain is now being put into the amps, and there's more gain on tap. And then on top of that, there are multiple revisions of this tube amplifier, right? There's multiple revisions of a JCM 800. The 2203 is the one that most people are familiar with being the common amplifier, but definitely not their first revision. And not to mention, it was not their last revision. There's a 2210 and a 2208 that add more gain on tap because most people were not happy with how little gain there was with the JCM 2203. And on top of that, after all these revisions, there's a JCM 900 and a JCM 2000, and then there's the DSL series, which means dual super lead. Let's not pretend for a second that those old amps would have not been considered obsolete by, their maker. Because if they weren't obsolete, they would just keep making the JCM 800 or the 59 Super Lead or whatever. Or for example, Mesa Boogie has made so many freaking revisions of the dual rectifier. If the previous one was not considered obsolete, you wouldn't get a new revision. I understand where he's coming from specifically with that Boss pedal, in that you don't own anything and you can't necessarily keep that thing running if Boss doesn't want you to. But that's not all or even most digital pieces of gear. While I think, yes, we should be wary of going to that because that is bad and unnecessary, let's not pretend that's everything. My Tonex will continue to work until it craps out. That could have happened to anybody. That could have happened to anything. That could happen to my current tube head, where it'll just stop working. And I could try to replace the parts, but it may not sound the same. I think a perfect piece of gear to like show that, show how digital doesn't necessarily mean obsolete, is this. This is my Zoom G1XON. And basically what that means is it's a Zoom G1X with a volume pedal / wah pedal / whatever, like a built-in expression pedal. Obviously, they don't still make these. I got this when I was in college about 10 years ago. It was pretty much my multi-effects pedal forever. I'm not going to say that it is, state of the art, but this hasn't stopped working just because Zoom doesn't support it anymore. It still functions. You can still find the firmware on their website. And even then, even before I updated the firmware, it still functioned. It's not obsolete. You can still use it. It's almost hilarious to me that he makes the point that digital obsolescence is that there's a new thing. And even in the video, I don't think he truly believes that, because he brings up the fact that modelers and captures are getting to sound basically as good as the amplifiers. And maybe there's, certain tiny frequencies that are there or not there in the original amp being played, but for the most part, it's pretty much the same. The only thing they're going to be able to add is more memory or more effects or, whatever. And it's like, okay, so that means that it's not going to be obsolete. They've already gotten to the point where the captures are the same as the amplifiers, give or take. It's not going to be beaten by more processing power to get a better capture. This does a JCM 800 sound. This is actually my backup rig for when I go gigging with my band. This replaces an entire pedal board because I know this works, and it has worked for 10 years. Likewise, I have amplifiers that are modeling amplifiers that I've bought multiples of just in case they go out, because it would be a pain in the ass to fix. One of those being this. This is a Yamaha THR 100 HD, meaning dual head. This has 2 inputs and 2 outputs, or you can sum the outputs to a single output. So you can have 2 guitars going into the inputs here and come out of 1 speaker. You can have 1 guitar going in the front and coming out of 2 speakers. You can have it emulating 2 different amplifiers at once. It's an incredibly cool piece of gear that Yamaha doesn't support anymore. They didn't sell enough. They were too expensive. According to Yamaha, they are obsolete. They still support the firmware, but they don't sell anymore. They don't make these anymore. But this is a piece of gear, right? This is potentially a digital piece of gear. But even though the Yamaha doesn't support it anymore, I can still use it. You want to come up here? My cat wants to say hi, everybody. Yeah. My point being that just because something is digital doesn't necessarily mean it's obsolete. Obviously, if it is like a subscription-based thing or a cloud-based thing, then yes, I think that buying into that is stupid and pointless and will become obsolete at some point. But if you buy gear that functions on its own and is only bolstered by having the ability to plug into a computer or digital or what have you, it won't be obsolete by definition because it functions by itself. I honestly think the video was made because he had to make a video for YouTube. This would resonate well with the people that he makes videos to, but I don't generally think that it's a particularly good point, and I don't think that he's right. I think that saying that tube amps last longer is good and a fair point, and we should look into repairability for digital amplifiers, for digital gear, because it is something that we should be able to do. There are not many things in the world still using tubes besides guitar heads, and at some point people are going to make the last tube, and suddenly all those tube heads, all of those pieces of gear that he thinks are not going to be obsolete will be. You won't be able to turn them on anymore because your tube's blown, and you're never going to get another one. It seems like it's a bad faith argument, and I didn't want to take that sitting down. I'm hoping to make more videos at some point in the future, potentially on something less inflammatory, hopefully. If you guys enjoyed, subscribe, share, tag Rhett. I don't know. Anyway, I guess that's just another thing.